A while ago, I spoke about the tactile nature of certain sounds in a game's soundtrack. Everything feels tactile here, like a food with a nice mouthfeel. Mochi? Maybe a nice sausage? While there's plenty of examples of that mechanical feeling in music, like this hammer effect you can hear in the piano in this lovely song, or the hammers you can much more obviously hear in one of my own songs, that is an incredibly niche thing that most people don't consciously appreciate when listening to music. To be honest, a lot of you might not even really know what I mean when I say tactile. Most people might not even notice if something is tactile in the music they listen to, and frankly, it'd be really silly if I dedicated an entire video to something as subjective as this. So instead, I'm doing an even sillier idea and dedicating an entire video to one game's use of that feeling. Have you ever played a game where it feels like they just thought of everything? Yeah, me neither, but I have played plenty of games where sound is a big driving factor that makes the game feel satisfying and rewarding to play. Stuff like rhythm games are easy pickings, but I'm talking like the different blocks making different sounds when you walk on them or place them in Minecraft, identifying bugs by their unique calls in Deep Rock Galactic, the clicks and the clocks of the mechanical pieces of a gun when inspecting them or reloading them in any COD game. The M1 Garand specifically. The entirety of Balatro. Oh yeah, we're talking about Balatro. Before I get too much further, shout out to Dom Palambi for allowing me to use his excellent funk fusion cover of the Balatro main theme. His channel and video will be linked in the description, so go listen to the music right now. Also, shouts out to the hard work by KF 2015, where they generated something like 216,000 individual frames to make up this Balatro background that I've been using. So they'll also be in the description, and let's get into the gambling. Oh god, where do I even begin with this game, honestly? We probably should start at the main menu, because it's the simplest. Every button you click on the main menu makes the same noise. And right off the bat, I would describe basically every menu and UI element in this game as analog, much like how clicky and mechanical everything sounds on older pieces of hardware. The clicky and mechanical feel that makes collectors absolutely fiend over pieces of tech like this, along with the obvious collector's aspect of it, and the same clicky sound that you'll get from a nice mechanical keyboard. I'm not gonna type on mine, but you get the point. Turns out the ASMR culture has infected us a lot more than we all give it credit for, because when a thing sounds nice or has a unique sound to it, we tend to want to keep playing with it and we want to keep using it. You know, in hindsight, maybe attributing this to the ASMR community specifically was a bit disingenuous, since I know the majority of it just comes from the ADHD response, but I can say ASMR community because clearly not everybody has ADHD, but if you play Balatro, you just might have ADHD. The only other unique sounds that you'll hear before actually starting a round will be the slightly softer and slightly more full-bodied when you hover over the locked card on the main menu, or a deck in the play screen. The when a card gets Thanos snapped off the screen, and the that plays when you exit to the main menu or load into a new run. The collection, on the other hand, now that is where it gets juicy. And by juicy, I really just mean that there's a few extra fun tidbits that I didn't realize were in there, and I just wanted to point them out. There's, of course, the aforementioned when you hover over any of the cards in the collection, tarot and planet included, but I think the biggest kicker for me is that I wasn't expecting that to hold true through every part of the collection. It even extends to your stats. Any card I hover over makes the sound, and while it's nothing special after hearing it 1,000 times, it is still a really fun touch that was included everywhere. There's also this reverse paper crinkling sound that, coupled with the materialization of the cards, very much fits that card opening sort of vibe. Crinkling that plastic that the cards came in before ogling it, whatever you just unwrapped. But the real things that caught my attention here were actually the tags and the blinds section, each with their own respective sounds associated with hovering over their icons. The tags with this incredibly satisfying plasticky sound like digging through a bin of children's toys, and the blinds with the ultra satisfying. But hey, we've been here for long enough, so I think it's time that we actually play some poker. Oh wow, look at that. Even the card flip has its own transition noise. I also never realized that hovering over the skip blind is actually what makes that plasticky noise. We'll skip just this one time. Oh wow, that's nice. When you select to go up against each blind, the sound effect makes it oddly early 90s karate sounding, kind of like the bamboo bonk sound effect, in a way that signals that it's your time to face this blind in the proverbial dojo. Editor's note, stop trying to bring back memories of Jaden Smith's Karate Kid for fuck's sake. That same sound will also play when you acquire a new tarot card, planet card, or joker card via the Emperor, the High Priestess, or Judgment respectively. I know I already spoke on the sound effect that plays when you hover over cards, but man, hearing them in rapid succession when you sweep over your hand is a whole different level of satisfying. And don't even get me started on the sounds the cards make when you actually select them and deselect them, with a nice and a much more subtle... I think I may have accidentally fallen into the trap of louder equals better, but the clicking of selecting cards and deselecting them has such a strong transient punch to it, and the general tone of the clicking is honestly really well designed. Maybe it's the fact that the clicking of each card brings a small amount of dopamine in and of itself because you're either selecting a bunch of cards to discard in favor of ones that might net you a better score, or those same cards are your big point scoring hand. So it's almost kind of like a preemptive build-up to the heavy bings and bongs that will win you the round. Once you've finally taken your first discard or your first hand played, the sound of your hand being replenished by your deck sounds fantastic. Kind of like a bunch of stiff cards being cracked like a whip off the back of the rest of the deck. And if that hand is a winner, then that sound will play a bunch of times in a very quick span of time, so it fills up your ears like a bunch of rocks being dropped on your headphones. That sounds kind of... No, that doesn't sound very nice. But look at that, I won, and I earned some cash. Let me collect that. Oh man, if you thought the cash register noise was satisfying, you have not played Balatro yet. To me, it sounds a little bit better than the cash register sound just because of the multiple coins aspect of it. And if anything, it actually sounds a little bit more like harvesting a gold pile in Sea of Thieves, but the dopamine hit from this money gained sound effect is infinitely more rewarding to the brain because $3 in Balatro means a hell of a lot more than like 50 gold in Sea of Thieves. The game has a little repeating money noise for every dollar accumulated at the end of each round, and they also have a much more obvious when the game is calculating how much money you earned at the end of the round, and it quite literally sounds like someone took their pocket change from the 7-Eleven and dropped it on the table where there happened to be a microphone that was on and recording. I will also say the same sound effect that you hear also plays when you spend money, but, and this might be the most privileged thing I've ever said, it feels good to spend money, especially when that money spent equates to your next big power spike to further the strength of your run. Honestly, the most consistent thing to talk about in the shop is the fact that almost every piece of text that appears on screen as if it was a part of a set piece also has its own version of the typing noise. Most of the time I kind of just forget that the game basically types out its signs like improve your run, but eventually your brain will kind of just subconsciously make the connection between that typing sound and the billboard-esque wording on some of the screens, and you'll come to realize just how much of a nice touch it is. That said, I'm not only going to talk about the text because that's boring as hell. We finally get into the potatoes of the shop. The card packs. That plays when you open any of them, mimicking the anticipation of your next big joker that's definitely going to change your run, the first planet card to set you up on your journey to have the highest score, or your next tarot pack to finally help set your economy up. I love because it's also the closest thing to gambling that my brain will enjoy, similar to all of you heathen viewers indulging in your fucking gacha games. Even in just the pack opening portion of the game, each one of these cards can do incredible things. And no, I'm not talking about the effects that each one of the cards have, but rather the sounds that they make when they do it. The sounds of jokers becoming foil, holographic, polychrome, or negative are so ear-catching that even if you have just a Balatro video or stream up in the background, this guy's my favorite, you almost can't help but diverge your attention from being productive or whatever else you're doing to see what they got, because surely it's something game-changing, right? Or maybe it's just another 8-ball. When you open the tarot packs, you can do all sorts of powerful shit with them, like give yourself more money, banish cards to the nether realms, or even affix them with powerful abilities like gaining extra chips, extra mult, a chance at making this little guy become stronger, and so many more. Again, while all of these are powerful, I'm not here to talk about the game really. This is a sound design video, so just listen to how satisfying the card flip is. It's enough to make a grown man shudder. And lastly, these planet cards, when used, level up your poker hand to make them a little bit stronger. And the way that you know it's working is because of the... that is leveling up your base chips and mult. And this is one of the few sounds that can get annoying if you, say, have a Perkio up and for some reason you decide that you just want to consume all of your planet cards back to back to back to back to back, and then you'll be hearing for a little while, almost to a tiring extent. There is actually one more thing that you can do with your cards that I haven't mentioned, but for the purposes of highlighting its wonderful sound, we actually have to wait until we find a very specific card pack that we're looking for. Once you're in a round beyond the first, you'll likely have at least one joker that will add chips, plus mult, or X mult, and that's where the really addictive part of Balatro starts, with each set of chips triggering a, each plus mult triggering a, and each X mult triggering a. By itself, it's nothing too crazy, just an auditory reminder of what your joker is supposed to be doing, once again creating that feedback loop of positive reinforcement to just keep doing the thing. The really crazy shit starts when you have a full set of jokers and a sizable deck full of enhanced cards, with each one of them basically triggering their own. And each of these comboing with the ascending pitch as you get more and more triggers of said. And eventually you'll get to the point where the game will speed up to account for how long your hand has been scoring, meaning that and almost become a stream of auditory information, like a bell that's a little too resonant and rings out for way too long. But in this game, the ringing is a sign that your build is actually doing something good, as opposed to the aforementioned bell toll basically being a signal for church, because you didn't want to go to church as a kid. Like, why the hell do I have to wake up so early for some dude that ain't never done shit for me? And eventually that sentiment leads you to the burning pits of hell, just like the burning of the chips in the mult once your hand exceeds the amount of points required to beat the blind, and suddenly the ringing tone sounds much more saturated, and boy howdy, you really, really should see what the longest hand in vanilla Balatro looks like.
Does that do anything? Okay. So this is what we got. We got 4 copies Baron, 3 copies Mine. We have a Polychrome Baron. We did Polychrome Mine to account for we had the 1 Bloodstone activation, so times 1.5 here. With 717 kings held in hand. You can't see it, but it's on the left side of the screen here. Got cut off a little bit. We played the glass card. It's E 9083. Allegedly.
Alright, we're back in the shop a second time, and I want to take this time to additionally mention a couple more sounds that different types of cards make. I already mentioned some things that you can do with them in the last shop, from enhancing them to give you more chips, mult, or money, all the way to just straight up killing them. But on top of that, you can also turn them into wild cards to make them basically every suit, turn them gold to give you $3 at the end of every round, turn them to stone to remove their suit and their rank entirely but giving you 50 chips every single time they score, turning them into steel cards, which gives you 1.5x mult at the end of your hand. But none of these have their own unique sounds, so I didn't really bother to talk about them. Now the real exciting stuff comes in the form of the negative card, the glass card, and the polychrome card, aka like, I don't know, my top 3 of 4 favorite looking cards in the game. And before I talk about the sound, I want to talk about the negative card, because really, I think its inclusion in this game is fucking awesome. Like, the ability to just not have a card take up a card slot in a game with limited card slots is pretty cool, and unironically actually has some synergy of its own. When you stumble upon a negative card, it'll make a sound, which is actually just a reversed version of the holographic sound effect, or at least pretty close. And I think that's pretty clever. Also, dude, like, you can't do this in vanilla Balatro, but like, look at this full deck of negative playing cards. Like, this is sick. Shouts out to the Cryptid mod for coming up with this idea, because these are phenomenal looking. Now, the glass playing cards, they don't really do anything special when you find them, but the reason I like them is because they have a 1 in 4 chance of shattering every hand, or however that happens, and generally the glass shattering sound, while being pretty abrasive, can actually still be satisfying in its own way with a video like this. The polychrome cards are fun because they make a very sheeny and shiny noise when you find them, or if you say hex a joker, for example, but they also make a fun little noise when they trigger. And as I just found out, the foil cards do the exact same thing.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
The last, and maybe one of the best things here to talk about, utilizes that special card pack that I alluded to earlier, the Spectral Pack. Playing cards in Balatro can also have seals on them. Red seals for re-triggering both played and scored cards, as well as cards in your hand, giving you this wonderful boost sound, gold seals for giving you $3 when scored, purple seals for giving you tarot cards when discarded, and blue seals for giving you the planet card correlating to the final hand that you played that round. You can naturally find playing cards with these seals if you open up a card pack, but you can also just force a seal onto one card by using any of their 4 correlated spectral cards. And maybe it's because this is a pretty rare sight for me to see, but it might have probably the top 5, maybe even top 3 most satisfying sounds in Balatro. Now, I tell you, if I had a wax seal stamp that made that noise whenever I stamped things, dude, I'd be stamping everything I could get my hands on. Alright, back into another round. Oh, god damn it, they debuffed my spade cards. That's like my favorite suit. That's alright, we have to make the best of what we have, and honestly, in a video like this, even having your cards debuffed has its upsides. Turns out if you try to play a card that is debuffed, it will make a sad, pathetic noise to further drill into your head that, hey, don't play this card, dummy. The same sort of thing applies for specific boss blinds that prevent you from playing certain hands, like the eye, the mouth, and the psychic, where you will instead hear a sound effect. The thing that I love about these 2 sound effects in particular is that they're very distinct from the rest. So even if they still have their tactile nature, as I mentioned, they don't sound nearly as bright or full of energy like everything else. So it very much strikes a certain chord that tells you that you did something wrong, even if you can visually see what you just did wrong. But sometimes you just played a bunch of debuffed cards because you needed to get a fresh hand of cards out, but you ran out of discards. For the love of God, Balatro, stop berating me like this. There's also a bunch of other neat little things, like food jokers making this noise when they expire, the ceremonial dagger getting its own crispy slicing sound when it deletes a joker off the face of the planet, the plasma deck getting this mildly futuristic sound when it balances your chips and your malt, the dice rolling sound effect of re-rolling a boss blind, the satisfying ticking sound of a scaling joker like Hit the Road or Runner getting scaled or reset, and there's honestly so many more things that I probably haven't even stumbled upon yet. This game just has a sound for everything, and I really do mean everything. I've had to come back to this script and add additional things maybe 4 times, just when I thought that I was already done, because there's just so many jokers in this game, so many cards, so many mechanics, so many tarot, so many planets, everything, and I just kind of keep finding and stumbling into new things that I didn't realize the game had a sound for. Granted, not every sound is unique, but they are all there, and I'd say about 99.95% of them are very satisfying and appropriate for the action at hand. But come on, you guys know me. I'm like the music guy. You really thought I was gonna talk this entire video without mentioning the infinitely hypnotic soundtrack? Are you kidding yourself? Am I kidding myself? Who's kidding who in this situation? This soundtrack absolutely bangs. It's on a constant loop all the time, and I can truthfully say, without a doubt, that it's the only looping soundtrack that I can listen for hours and have no urge to turn it off. It's the soundtrack that I can hear for hours. I have heard it for hours, watching more of this guy right here, and I still find myself head nodding before, during, and after the video is over. It's the soundtrack that I deliberately put into my iPod because it's excellent background music for doing anything, and not just limited to playing poker, because if I'm honest, I am terrible at poker games, and you'll never catch me in Vegas for as long as I live. Okay, you might catch me there like once or twice, but I'm not gambling is the point I'm trying to make. As basically everybody and their mother knows, this soundtrack actually exists in 5 parts and employs what we call adaptive music, so you're basically getting a mini music overview from me as well. So let's get back to the gambling. We start with the classic theme of this game. It starts with these really weird chords. They're really funky, and they don't really tie themselves to one particular emotion. They just sort of vibe. The chords open with this incredibly slow flanger effect before the drums and the bass kick in, and these 2 things fucking hit. The bass is playing an incredibly fun bass line that mostly sticks to the chord tones, but isn't afraid to move around like its own instrument that deserves the same amount of respect as every other instrument. Then they kick it up a notch with this wobbly modulated synth playing the most iconic lead this side of the 20th century, and I stand by that. With a much more subtle lead playing a supporting top line to add a nice flavor to the already existing delicious flavor this song has presented us with. Why do I always make food references? God damn it. Then the lead is given some time to chill out in the background while we get these sweet arpeggios, and I don't know what it is about this instrument, but its transient is just so incredibly satisfying to listen to, and it fits right in with the tactile sensation I've been talking about throughout. Have an additional section right here with a little bit of syncopation, which feels only slightly off kilter given the nature of the 7/4 time signature, which I would make a big deal if it wasn't for, this. I'm sure there's already a small group of people who really enjoy this music and already figured out the 7/4 time signature, but it really seems to have made a huge impact on people like this guy.
No. 7/4.
But me, well again, I've played so much Risk of Rain and listened to so much of its soundtrack that I find normalcy in this abnormal time signature. And as a matter of fact, I think in a lot of situations, if it's done right, 7/4 sounds almost as whole and normal as 5/4, and in my opinion, a lot more normal than 5/4. But maybe that's a hot take, I don't know. And I don't want to sound like a snob when I say this, when this was playing at the Game Awards, one, it's pretty fucking awesome because an indie game like that absolutely deserves to make an appearance at the Game Awards, but also it was playing in a 4/4 time signature, and I could really feel it, and it felt more off kilter than I think how 7/4 feels to people who don't know what 7/4 music is like. The last section to talk about, and again, the first of 5 different themes in this one fucking poker game, contains a lot more of the sliding iconic synth, and I can really only attribute the feeling of this section to when you're listening to a killer sliding synth in a different soundtrack, and you're kind of just air pianoing your way through it. If you're one of those weirdos like myself who likes to air instrument all of their instruments, and sometimes it kind of becomes dangerous because I do it in my car, and that's a dangerous driving condition, but don't tell nobody. There's a lot of pitch modulation, there's a lot of sliding, and there is, to say a lot of groove is even an understatement. There's also this super itty bitty tiny small little drum break section that almost catches me air drumming every time it happens, and believe me, it happens almost instinctively, no matter what I'm actually doing. Now, from this point forward, now that I've discussed all the bones of everything, the arrangement's basically going to be entirely the same. The blind theme was the main way to introduce all of the arrangement quirks happening, and the rest of the themes will be to just show off how different sound selections help to make the music feel ever present without being repetitive or annoying. The blind theme was just very full sounding, and in contrast, the shop theme feels very secondary, despite how much time you'll actually end up being in the shop. The music is lacking a lot of that lower to mid frequency, despite the bass still actually being there. The chords being played sound incredibly tinny and kind of weak, yet they still have some semblance of presence in this mix. The chords also just have like a constant, persistent, slow, flanger adjacent effect applied to them, which creates just that much more movement. When I call the music secondary, I really do mean that the music sounds like something you'd hear casually playing in a nearby shop in a way, which, duh, it's the fucking shop theme. It's a little bit flashy, it has a little bit of funk going on, just enough to attract you in to buy something, or maybe just browse around. But it definitely feels like it has the bones of the blind theme and not the other way around. You know, in hindsight, the blind theme probably could have afforded to just be the song that plays all the time, just because of how complex the arrangement is. It's funky time signature, it's funky rhythms, it's funky musical content, it's funky sonic space. All these things make it unique and diverse enough that honestly, it would eventually just blend into the background while you're playing the game, because the gameplay is so addicting. However, it's the obvious changes in the sonic space between the blind theme and the shop theme and every other theme that I think makes it stand out just enough in a way of fascination at just how smoothly it blends in with each other, and the fact that it's constantly intertwining and you're going in between a bunch of different versions of it, but it's never really enough for you to like stop and pay mention to what's actually going on, just to pay enough mention to realize that it's a little bit different. Unless, of course, you're somebody who's like me and you kind of just get paid to analyze music and overanalyze music. Immediately, one of the most interesting things you're going to hear with the Arcana theme is that if you thought the main lead synth was weird in any of the other previous songs, this one is even weirder, and it and the bass are playing the bass line. And it took me until right about now to realize that the bass was even there in the first place, because I genuinely just thought it was the weird synth playing the bass line. I think the characteristics of this synth add a bit of a bizarre feeling to this track, or I guess maybe I should say bizarre feeling. As a person well-versed in bullshitting my way through video essays, I heard this bizarre feeling, and I equate it to the feeling that, say, a white European person would feel when going to a shop that they classify as an exotic market, which could honestly be something as simple as going to a Mexican butcher shop. But the point is, think of how elusive the idea of tarot is to a lot of people, particularly Midwestern white moms for some reason. There's something kind of magical that draws them in and makes them want to invest their time, and mostly their money, into learning tarot and or attending tarot reading sessions. That is the kind of vibe that I think this track induces. Yes, you heard me right. Balatro music can be appealing to white Midwestern moms. God, what has this channel fucking become? This game and its soundtrack have a very interesting history with me, mostly because I started off not really caring that much about this game. Like a lot of content creators that I like would talk about the game because it was fucking breaking the landscape open and breaking it in half for what a video game could be, how addicting this game was. And I remember being like, yeah, I know this game is big and all, but like I don't play Yahtzee, I don't play poker, I'm not good at card games, I'm not good at going to Vegas, hence the Vegas joke that I made earlier. And a lot of people were like, well, you don't really have to know poker at all because this breaks the hell out of poker, but also because it explains to you very basic poker terms and hands that are really easy to understand. And then like instantaneously I was like, okay, surely I have to give this a shot. And then I really liked the game, and then I started bringing a bunch of other people into the game, and then I started telling them the exact same thing, that hey, you don't actually have to understand poker in order to be able to understand this game. And now I've thrown in like 100 or so hours into the game, and I've consumed hundreds of hours of content on the game, and I've been consuming mods and watching other people playing the game and supporting them playing the game, and now I'm making my own damn video on it. But like, I remember back when I was first trying to understand this game, and I remember I would see content about the game just fucking everywhere, and the tarot theme specifically has just triggered a sense memory of bringing me back to that time before I was absolutely batshit insane about this game, when I was willfully ignorant about how good it actually was. The tarot theme was ironically that thing that I was hearing all the time, and it's very bizarre because it's almost like a weird sense of nostalgia, even though it's only nostalgia from like a couple of months ago, right? Like, that's not how nostalgia works. I sometimes kind of have to wonder what the idea was behind making all of the hand level ups be tied to planets, and how it was decided to make certain hands tied to specific planets. But I think it's pretty cool and creative nonetheless. Also, a little part of my brain is thinking that maybe it wasn't really that deep and they just said, I like planets, I'm an astrology nerd, I'm an astronomy nerd, I'm a space guy, I'm making this cool game, there's a lot of planets, there's a lot of hands, boom, done. I'm equally as curious to see how Luis was able to get this really spacey and amorphous audio without making everything feel loud and overwhelming. Because in my experience, applying enough reverb to achieve that kind of effect leaves the music sounding kind of distorted and what I would classify as untamed. A lot of artifacting, lots of weird little peaks and valleys, and a lot of harsh frequencies sticking out. But maybe it's just as simple as applying a filter to condense the music into only the mid frequencies and EQing everything but the bass so that you don't have the bass frequencies muddying up the mix. Or maybe it's some special sauce that they got over there. You know, some special regional sauce. And I made another fucking food joke. The funny thing is that even in this mosh of random sounds that sound vaguely of the Balatro theme, you can still hear the blasted slow flanger effect, proving once again that even flangers work out in space. What the fuck? Who wrote this? Nobody says that. There's also just a distinct lack of the main melody lead here, and my main guess as to why that is because it would really throw off the spacey and lethargic feeling of the track if you could still hear the lead doing all of its little weeps and whoops. And for some reason, despite the fact that I didn't put it in the Arcana theme does the same thing. You know, now that I'm kind of listening to the Celestial theme outside of the context of the game, now that I'm listening to it in isolation, I'm realizing it actually does have a little bit of overwhelmingness to it. Everything sounds like it's been blended together rather than one particular element sticking out like a sore thumb. I'm sure at this point it has something to do with EQing the frequencies more than likely, because deadass, if you were to just like throw a whole smattering of reverb onto the main Balatro theme, even taking out its main lead and just simplifying it down a little bit, you'd still have a lot of situations where you're going to have a lot of stuff that's sticking out more than it needs to. And I feel like the proof is in the fact that once we get to this other section where the synths are playing a lot more sparse rhythms compared to how they are for the first couple of minutes, where it's a lot more rapid and a lot more consistent, a lot of that isn't nearly as overwhelming as the beginning portion of the song. So I think it really is just the raw sound data being thrown into it. It is a little bit overwhelming in a sense, because when you don't have as many chords being played and as quick of a rhythm, you're not going to have that situation happening. Now that I'm listening to the song in isolation a little bit more, I was also kind of hoping that there would be like slight drum sound selection changes between the two, because I don't know what, I feel like if you replaced the snare with like a rim shot, like a nice crispy rim shot in the Celestial theme, it would be really cool. Maybe he did try that. I don't really know. I feel like, I don't know, a rim shot might be kind of cool and would actually be another thing to help kind of separate it out from everything else. Not like you really needed more to separate it out, but it would just be like a fun little nod, you know? Alright, so I guess they really did just drop the main lead for most of these songs, with it really only being, you know, present in like 2 of them. And in hindsight, that might be the entire point. You only get the main lead when you're hanging out in the shop or hanging out in a small or large blind, because that's where you're going to be spending most of your time. In the case of the boss blind, the removal of the lead and the adding of the dramatic organ, I think is what it is, it forces you to put a lot more focus on the strength of the boss in question. You can still vibe to your heart's content, but you cannot vibe that much. You have to lock the fuck in. The organ is really one of those things that took me a while to even notice. I just kind of noticed that the main lead wasn't there, and I thought that it sounded an awful lot like the Celestial theme, but without all the space. Most of that feeling comes from the chords specifically, as they lack a lot of the characteristics seen in the original theme, and you don't quite hear each chord being played as much, as it sort of just flows into itself most of the time. I also noticed that the bass feels like it has a lot less character to it. It just sounds like a deep, rumbling bass, and that's even more noticeable when it's hitting the root notes. For the record, I think the lack of character is a very subtle but effective way to help create enough diversity from the other themes, even if I only just recently noticed it after having to meticulously pick apart this track in isolation of the game. I also got to give a massive, absolutely just gigantic, huge shout out to Dylan King. He's a dude I like literally just found out about through his Balatro video, kind of, sort of, doing a couple of things that I'm doing here. And he brings up a couple of interesting points about the soundtrack. One, it's apparently artificially slowed down from its original composition, which does a couple things. It reduces its sample rate, so it makes it sound more vintage. And because its sample rate is reduced, it also does what he dubbed as makes the high end feel a little bit more tame or a little bit softer, which in general isn't technically doing anything for its vibe per se, but it does make the listening experience a lot more enjoyable for people, and probably is what makes it easy to listen to for hours and hours and hours on end. There is such a thing as like ear fatigue, and I think a lot of it usually comes from if you're listening to the exact same thing over and over again, if you're, say, a producer or a mixing engineer. But another thing is if you're listening to music that is just so incredibly loud or harsh or whatever, most normal people's brains just tend to get a little bit fatigued and kind of tired after that, and this can help to sort of fight back against that in a way. Well, all good things have to come to an end at some point, and even the music is still technically present when you lose. Granted, it's nothing crazy. I'm pretty sure it's just the original theme slowed down to hell, but even that has its place in this game. This slowed down version kind of reminds me of old Nintendo games. You know, the ones that would scare the shit out of you when you got a game over, almost like they were trying to fearmonger kids into getting better at their video games. If you took most Mario themes and you slowed them down as much as this theme is slowed down while seeing Mario quote-unquote dead on the floor, surely that would scare you as a child. But that said, the rhythm is still there. This music is actually still pretty funky, so you can still kind of vibe with the music while you contemplate why you lost your last run. And if you're a sick freak, you might even call this a slowed and reverbed version of the Balatro theme to listen to while making your 2-hour commute home in the rain. And if you are that person, I hate you. The last thing I noticed when listening to this theme is that whenever you hover over the YouTube timeline, you can actually see these little peaks and valleys where people click on and off of the video. And the funny part is that they basically all line up exactly where the current theme ends and the next one begins. It's almost like people are clicking onto the video to find the one specific theme they want to listen to for 4 minutes, or maybe like loop for 4 minutes if they can even do that, and then they just leave the video. I swear I'm not a fraud when I say this, but ironically I find myself spending more time watching Balatro videos than I do playing the fucking game. But I still can't help but feel a feral urge to jump on the game whenever I'm watching one of those videos and I hear any of the sounds heard in this game. Unfortunately, there isn't as much of a satisfying feel to the game when I play on mobile, since there seems to be a chain reaction that occurs where mouse click plus card click equals dopamine rush. And you can't really get that on mobile, or at least not yet. There are plenty of games in this world that you can only feel the strength of the game by playing it.
I got you, Holmes! I got you, Holmes!
Some games where you can get at least a good idea of the feeling by watching other people play. Some games that don't even require that you play the game once you've seen someone else play it, and Balatro falls squarely into its own category in my opinion. A game that feels almost exactly as satisfying to watch as it is to play, and one that usually incentivizes you to jump on the game once you see somebody playing the game. Some might argue that the lack of personal agency when watching someone else play the game makes it a much worse experience for them, and honestly I get that to a certain extent, but I think nowadays when watching Balatro content, I kind of think to myself, if I was in this situation, I would probably do at least some of these things myself, and then I almost impart my own mental processes into the pre-recorded video that have no actual bearing on the outcome of said video. Sure, I don't literally get the tactile experience of clicking all the cards to play, but I can still feel the power of the cards. I can still feel the power that they hold due to their incredible sound design. Sometimes I can simply have a Balatro video on in the background, just knowing that something satisfying is happening when I hear all the clicks and the clocks. I also found them to be pretty good ear catchers when I'm editing a video and want to pop something on the screen, so the sounds are also multi-purpose, and that makes them just a little bit nicer to me. Any attentive listeners would have noticed this in the Deep Rock video, actually. In a place as chill and quiet as the space rig, it's perfectly fine to have a song that fits with the vastness and doesn't really intrude much while you're either waiting to assemble your squad, or are waiting for your 4th teammate to come back, or are waiting for your 4th teammate to finish their build, or are waiting for your 4th team. Since playing Balatro and deeply listening into all the noises that everything makes, I've been honing in on every other little noise that other games make. And while none of them can even come close to holding a candle to the power that Balatro holds over my stupid ADHD brain, I'll never say no to a game if they want to add that much detail into their game's audio library. Alright, so now that I've finished analyzing one of the most arbitrary things in the Game of the Year contender, what was the point of all of this? Honestly, nothing. because as I just found out, basically everything here is under the Creative Commons license. Not to say that there wasn't some amount of work put into these sounds to give them the Balatro flavor, but I just feel like, you know, had I known this earlier, I wouldn't have spent 8 or 9 pages or whatever talking about this, because now some guy is just going to show up in the comments and tell me that fact, like, dude, did you even watch the entire video? But I know the answer to that. He definitely didn't watch the whole video, because if he did, he would have gotten to this point and learned that maybe sometimes you should just watch the whole video first before immediately critiquing details on it that were clearly stated in the video. Jerry.